I got into a barroom fight. I was carrying a gun, which was the stupidest thing I've ever done.
Johnny Paycheck shot a man in 1985. The bullet grazed his head. But that wasn't even the worst thing he did that year. At 47, he was carrying 2 loaded guns, wearing a bulletproof vest on stage, and burning through $1.2 million while owing the IRS $300,000. His biggest hit played on the radio while he sat in a rehab facility, unable to celebrate. By the time he died in 2003, alone in a hospital room, his son missed saying goodbye by just 20 minutes. This is the footage that showed the full tragedy. Johnny Paycheck was born as Donald Eugene Lytle on May 31, 1938, in Greenfield, Ohio. The Great Depression was still casting a long shadow across America. His family struggled like everyone else. His father worked multiple jobs just to keep the household running. Donald grew up in a small farming town where money was tight and hope was rare. He was restless and wild from the start. That tough childhood shaped him. It gave him a deep understanding of struggle, and that feeling never left his music. At just 9 years old, Donald stepped onto a stage for the first time. He sang Hank Williams' "Your Cheatin' Heart" and won a $5 prize. For a kid in 1947, $5 was a small fortune, worth about $60 today. He didn't save a cent. He bought candy and comic books instead. That impulsive spending would become a habit. But more than that, it was a sign of how fast he lived and how little he cared about playing it safe. Even at 9, he was drawn to heartbreak songs. That was no accident. His life would mirror those lyrics for years to come. By 15, he'd had enough of school. He dropped out and hit the road, hitchhiking through the Midwest. He sang in honky-tonks for meals and loose change. Most nights, he slept in barns or under the stars. He'd lie about his age just to get into bars. He wanted music, and nothing was going to stop him. The honky-tonk scene was tough, full of fights, gambling, and shady characters. But Donald held his own. He learned to read a room fast and keep himself alive. That raw experience gave his music an edge. He didn't just sing about rough living, he lived it. At 17, he joined the Navy. Maybe he thought it would give him structure. But within weeks, his rebellious streak exploded. When a commanding officer denied him leave to see his dying grandmother, Donald snapped. He punched the officer so hard he broke the man's nose and gave him a concussion. That one moment changed everything. He was court-martialed and thrown into military prison. He never trusted authority again. That hatred for rules and power would become a theme in his music for decades. Prison turned out to be where his music really started. Locked away for 2 years at Portsmouth Naval Prison, he met other inmates who taught him guitar. They used smuggled paper to write lyrics and built makeshift instruments from scraps. One of his cellmates had been a Nashville session player before going AWOL. That man taught Donald advanced guitar skills and how to craft a proper song. It was a strange place for an education, but it worked. He came out of prison not just tougher, but better. In 1958, he arrived in Nashville with only $37 to his name. He slept in his car outside the Grand Ole Opry for nearly 3 weeks. He cleaned up in public restrooms and worked nights washing dishes at Crystal for 60 cents an hour. He ate leftover burgers to stay alive. But during the day, he was busy sneaking backstage and shaking hands. He was broke, but determined. That hunger to survive and to sing was all he had. And it was enough. 2 years later, he recorded his first single under the name Donnie Young. It was called Miracle of Love. He believed it would be his big break. It wasn't. The record sold just 847 copies across the entire country. Decca Records dropped him immediately. He kept the rejection letter in his guitar case for years as a reminder. It nearly broke him, but it also hardened him. He now knew the music business could chew you up and leave you with nothing. So he pivoted. He became a session musician, playing bass for $3 an hour. Between 1960 and 1962, he worked on more than 200 recordings. One of them was an early demo for Tammy Wynette. The hours were brutal. The pay was terrible. Sometimes he went entire days without eating, living off coffee and vending machine snacks. He wasn't getting credit, but he was learning. He studied how songs were built, how a studio worked, and how stars were made. Slowly, he was preparing for his second shot. In 1962, he landed a job playing bass for George Jones. It was a huge opportunity, but it came with chaos. Both men were heavy drinkers. One night in Texas, a drunken fight ended with George leaving Donald at a gas station with no money and no ride. Donald had to hitchhike 200 miles back to Nashville. Still, their chemistry on stage was undeniable. Donald's harmonies added depth to Jones's shows. He became an important part of the sound, even if the partnership was always one bad drink away from disaster. In 1964, George Jones released The Race Is On. It became one of his biggest hits, but most fans never knew the harmony vocals were sung by Donald. He was still being paid just $50 a week. No royalties, no credit. The song sold over 500,000 copies, and he got nothing but a paycheck. That betrayal stuck with him. He started demanding fair contracts later in his career and never forgot how easily the system could steal your work and leave you behind. That paranoia sometimes helped him. Other times, it made him enemies. But it was born from real pain, and it gave his outlaw country music a truth that couldn't be faked. In 1964, a broke country singer named Donald Eugene Little walked into a courthouse in Greenfield, Ohio, hoping to reinvent himself. He wanted a new name, something tough, something that sounded like trouble. He admired a Chicago boxer named Johnny Paycheck, so that's what he meant to write down. But when it came time to sign the legal papers, he misspelled it. He added an extra C, turning it into Paycheck. Fixing the mistake would have cost him $25, and he didn't even have that. So he left it. Just like that, Johnny Paycheck was born. Not the boxer, but the outlaw country singer who'd raised hell for decades. The name turned out to be perfect. He sang for people who were sick of bosses, bills, and being broke. A man named Paycheck, who barely had one, singing about quitting jobs and breaking rules. It stuck. It worked. And it gave him an edge no polished Nashville star could fake. Just a year later, in 1965, Paycheck signed with Little Darlin' Records. That's when he made his first mark with a song called A11. It was recorded during a sweaty, 14-hour session on Music Row. The track climbed to number 35 on the country charts. For it, he received a royalty check for exactly $847. At the time, he was 27, and it was the most money he'd ever seen. He stared at that check for nearly an hour before he cashed it. Then he went wild. He bought a beat-up 1962 Cadillac DeVille for $600, spent $150 on flashy stage clothes, and blew the last $97 partying for 3 straight days at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge. That check didn't just buy him stuff, it gave him belief. If he could earn that from one song, maybe he could make it after all. But being Johnny Paycheck wasn't just about the music, it was about danger. And in early 1966, danger came looking for him. He was playing at a rough little place in Mobile, Alabama. when a woman named Dolores Mackenzie cornered him in the parking lot with a loaded .38 revolver. She said they were meant to be together. Said she'd kill them both if he walked away. Paycheck talked her down somehow and walked away shaken. The next day, he bought himself a .22 pistol for $35. From that night on, he carried it on stage. At first for protection. Then it became part of the act. Sometimes during a wild song, he'd fire blanks into the air. Fans ate it up. He wasn't just singing outlaw country, he was living it. That same year, he wrote a song called The Lovin' Machine. It was raw and dirty, and he knew it. Lines like, "Push my buttons right, and I'll work all night," made radio stations panic. Within 2 weeks, 47 stations banned it across the Bible Belt. Some DJs even smashed the records live on air. But banning it only made it hotter. People drove hundreds of miles just to get their hands on it. It sold 89,000 copies. For Paycheck, it was a lesson that would shape the rest of his career. Controversy sells. By March 1967, Paycheck was invited to play the Grand Ole Opry, country music's biggest stage. He should have been thrilled. But instead, he got drunk. He started at Ernest Tubbs' record shop bar and kept going. By 9:47 p.m., when he took the stage to perform A11, he was wobbling, slurring, barely standing. Then, halfway through the song, he vomited. Right there, on the sacred 6-foot circle of wood that had been cut from the Ryman stage. The crowd sat in stunned silence. Paycheck didn't even realize what had happened. He kept singing in his own mess. Security dragged him off. The Opry banned him for 2 years. That disaster sealed his image. He wasn't just a wild card, he was chaos in boots. 4 years later, in 1971, he signed with Epic Records. Right away, he clashed with Billy Sherrill, a legendary producer who wanted polish. Paycheck wanted grit. When Sherrill tried to add strings to one of his tracks, Paycheck lost it. He grabbed his Gibson J45 and threw it through the studio window. The damage? $2,300. Shards of glass were found for weeks, but Sherrill didn't walk away. He knew Paycheck was difficult, but he was also brilliant. That same year, they recorded She's All I Got. Paycheck was so drugged and drunk, he couldn't remember making it. Literally. He had been on a 3-day cocaine and whiskey binge. Sherrill had to feed him lyrics, one line at a time. It took 14 hours to get the track right. When the song came out and hit #2 on the charts, Paycheck heard it on the radio and thought it was someone else. His band had to teach him his own lyrics before he could perform it live. The next year, in 1972, things got uglier. After a performance at the Grand Ole Opry House, a TV executive named Harold Morrison pulled him aside. He suggested Paycheck clean up for national television. Paycheck responded by punching him in the face. The executive hit the amps, needed 12 stitches, and spent 2 days in the hospital. Paycheck stood over him and said, "I'd rather play honky-tonks for the rest of my life than sell my soul to television." That quote made headlines. The punch made him a legend. In 1973, Paycheck started working on an album called Somebody Loves Me. It turned into a cocaine-fueled nightmare. He'd lock himself in hotel rooms for 72 hours, writing songs in wild, drugged-up marathons. He refused to work with anyone he didn't like. He believed the mics were cursed. He thought earlier takes had hidden messages. He re-recorded vocals 43 times for just one track. Studio bills hit $47,000. Epic nearly dropped him, but somehow, through all the madness, the album got made. By then, His paranoia had gone full tilt. He carried 2 loaded pistols at all times, a .38 in a shoulder holster and a .22 in his boot. He also wore a custom money belt with exactly $10,000 in cash. Always, even on stage. He'd sometimes stop mid-song to count it, just to be sure it was all still there. He claimed it was protection. "This business will eat you alive," he told reporters. In November 1974, airport security caught him with the guns. He was fined $5,000. The story made national news. His accountant later said that between 1973 and 1975, Paycheck burned through more than $200,000 in cash. He even gave away stacks of money to strangers he thought were industry spies, hoping to buy their silence. Johnny Paycheck was on top of the world in 1977. His song, "Take This Job and Shove It," hit #1 on the country charts and stayed there for 2 weeks. It sold over 2.3 million copies and turned him into a household name. But while the song climbed the charts, Johnny wasn't doing interviews, touring, or celebrating. He was in rehab. His biggest success came at the exact moment when he couldn't enjoy it. The song ran for 18 weeks on the charts, inspired a Hollywood film, and echoed through working-class America. But Paycheck was locked in a personal war with drugs and alcohol, and it cost him everything. That moment should have changed his life forever. It did, but not in the way anyone expected. In 1978, just 1 year after his hit, Paycheck made $890,000. But instead of building wealth, he burned through $1.2 million. Most of it went to drugs, booze, and legal fees. His entourage helped keep the party going. His problems with the law started stacking up. Lawsuits, arrests, and IRS troubles followed one after another. In 1982, the IRS hit him with a lien for $103,000. A few years later, they added another one for $300,000. By 1990, he filed for bankruptcy. The money came fast, but his demons came faster. And soon, he couldn't outrun either. His personal life was just as chaotic. He married Sharon Ray, and they had a son together. But the marriage fell apart quickly. Rumors swirled about an affair with a 19-year-old backup singer during their honeymoon. Whether that story is true or not, what is clear is that their relationship couldn't survive the storm of Paycheck's legal battles and addictions. In 1981, he was arrested for statutory rape in Wyoming. He pled down to a lesser charge. Sharon stood by him through years of headlines, lawsuits, and courtrooms, but even she had a breaking point. The damage to their marriage couldn't be undone. At his shows, Paycheck's behavior became more and more erratic. One night in Detroit, he accused his band of stealing from his dressing room. Right in the middle of the concert, he fired the entire group. Then, he finished the show alone with just a guitar. These kinds of meltdowns became common. He burned bridges in the industry and scared off people who once believed in him. His reputation collapsed under the weight of his paranoia and violence. The threats weren't just in his head. He started showing up to gigs wearing a bulletproof vest. He believed angry drug dealers and ex-partners were out to get him. The IRS was chasing him, and his enemies were piling up. Still, he kept performing, even as his life crumbled behind the curtain. In 1985, things reached a breaking point. During an argument in a bar in Hillsboro, Ohio, he pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and shot a man. The bullet grazed the man's head. After he pulled the trigger, Johnny Paycheck didn't wait around. He jumped into his gold 1983 Cadillac Eldorado and took off, heading north on State Route 62. Witnesses said he was flying down the road at over 80 miles per hour in a 45 zone. The chase stretched across 3 counties, putting drivers in danger as flashing lights followed behind him. But it didn't last forever. At 1:47 a.m., just over 43 miles from the bar where it all started, troopers found his car parked at a Flying J truck stop near Wilmington, Ohio. The engine was still running. The radio was blasting his own hit, "Take this job and shove it." Paycheck was passed out behind the wheel. On the passenger seat lay the .22 caliber revolver, still warm, with 1 spent shell and 4 live rounds inside. On the floorboard, a shattered bottle of Jack Daniels. His blood alcohol level? A staggering 0.24, 3 times the legal limit. Officers shook him awake. He mumbled something about defending his honor, claimed he was Johnny Cash's cousin, and resisted arrest. It wasn't true, but the moment was captured on video by a local news crew listening to police scanners. That footage aired across the country. And just like that, whatever was left of his career took a major hit. The trial started on March 15, 1986. From the very beginning, Paycheck showed no regret. He stood on the courthouse steps, giving interviews like it was a press tour. "Larry Wise had it coming," he said, "and if I had to do it over again, I'd probably aim better." That quote landed front and center in the prosecutor's closing argument. Inside the courtroom, he wasn't any calmer. He interrupted the judge, argued with lawyers, and at one point stood up and started singing his old hit again, until bailiffs stopped him. 14 people testified. There was security footage, medical records, ballistics. The victim, Larry Wise, had permanent hearing loss and chronic headaches. The defense tried to claim Paycheck was temporarily insane from alcohol and stress. But his public outbursts ruined any hope of sympathy. On April 3rd, the jury came back in just over 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. His sentence? 9 years and 7 months in prison. He was sent to Chillicothe Correctional Institution. Life inside was brutal. At first, he refused to join rehab programs. He didn't think he needed them, but he wasn't just any inmate. He was a famous one. That made him a target. Inmates wanted to hurt him or take advantage of him. Someone even tried to stab him with a sharpened toothbrush. To survive, he made alliances with prison gangs. The man who once stood proud on stage was now trying to stay alive behind bars. But something changed. Around 1988, Paycheck said he found God. 2 years later, after a heart attack in his cell, he went deeper. He became a born-again Christian. He started leading Bible studies, wrote gospel songs, gave anti-drug talks to young people. His appeal had failed, and it looked like he'd serve every day of his sentence. But he kept his faith. Not for the cameras, not for the music industry, just for himself. In January 1991, he got out early. After serving just 22 months, Ohio Governor Richard Celeste pardoned him. But the world outside had moved on. Country music had changed. New stars filled the charts. Radio didn't want to play a felon's songs. Venues didn't want the risk. Labels didn't want the drama. He tried to bounce back, but it was tough. His debts were still there. Over $1.6 million in unpaid taxes. His first concert after prison said it all. The venue could hold 2,000 people. Only 89 showed up. On stage, he broke down. He apologized. He cried. It was raw, real, heartbreaking. But he didn't stop. He played small shows. He spoke to kids about staying off drugs. He recorded again. And somehow, it worked. Slowly. In 1997, the Grand Ole Opry made him an official member. A moment of redemption. As the 1980s rolled on, Paycheck's finances completely collapsed. He owed over $300,000 to the IRS. He tried changing his name to John Austin Paycheck to restart his career, but nothing worked. His records stopped selling. His songs stopped charting. By the end of the decade, he was broke and mostly forgotten. The bankruptcy filing in 1990 made it official. He had lost it all. Then came the darkest chapter. In 1981, after a concert in Casper, Wyoming, Paycheck stayed at the home of a fan's mother. A 12-year-old girl who had been at the concert later accused him of rape. The story shocked the town and rocked the country music world. 2 felony charges were filed, but Paycheck's lawyers managed to negotiate a deal. The charges were dropped to a single misdemeanor. He paid a $1,000 fine and didn't even show up in court. He said he couldn't afford the trip because of the IRS lien. The girl's family filed a $3 million civil suit. It never went to trial. In 1990, just before the case was set to begin, Paycheck declared bankruptcy. That move put the lawsuit on hold, and it was never resolved. The timing looked deliberate. The pain for the victim didn't go away, but Paycheck managed to avoid real punishment. This wasn't the only time he'd used fame to dodge consequences. His band members told police he often had problems with women and used his celebrity to hide them. In another case, he was removed from a flight for groping a flight attendant. Even after the Wyoming scandal, other country stars rallied to help him. George Jones and Merle Haggard paid his bail after the shooting. Jerry Lee Lewis raised money for his legal bills. The industry kept protecting him until they didn't. As the scandals piled up, the industry turned its back. Music execs didn't want his name attached to anything. At one point, a label insider said they'd make sure no one ever knew who Johnny Paycheck was. And they meant it. He disappeared for a while, lost in booze and regret on the West Coast. He stopped being the man with the outlaw swagger. He became a shadow of what he once was. Years of hard living caught up with him. By 1995, his health collapsed. He had emphysema and severe asthma. Doctors said he wouldn't make it 5 more years. His lungs were ruined from smoking 3 packs a day and using cocaine. He needed an oxygen tank just to breathe. He could barely walk. The same lungs that once roared on stage were now shutting down. Money was gone, too. In 1990, he filed for bankruptcy. He had just $1,247 left. The IRS put a $300,000 lien on him. He had to sell his guitars, his stage outfits, everything. Friends and old bandmates started holding benefit shows just to pay for his medicine. He couldn't even afford oxygen tanks. He spent his final years in a nursing home in Nashville, hooked up to machines, whispering instead of singing. Friends said visiting him was heartbreaking. The man who once lit up arenas was now lying in bed, fighting for breath. Sometimes he couldn't even finish a sentence. But he never lost that spirit. He was frustrated, sure, angry that he couldn't perform. But deep down, he kept fighting. Johnny Paycheck died on February 19, 2003. He was 64. Alone in a hospital room. A nurse was with him when he passed. His son Jonathan was on the way, stuck in traffic. He missed him by just 20 minutes. Doctors said his breathing had gotten worse by the hour. Even at the end, his eyes stayed alert, like he knew what was happening. The cause of death was emphysema and asthma. His funeral was unlike any other. Over 200 people came. Country legends like George Jones, Hell's Angels in leather jackets, friends from both worlds, music and outlaw life. George Jones gave a tearful speech. He even paid for the burial plot himself. Hell's Angels acted as pallbearers. They played Paycheck's songs at the service. Old Violin, Amazing Grace, Songs of Sorrow, Songs of Faith,